Asteroids. What do you call the masses of space rocks floating in outer space that are smaller than planets and even smaller than our moon? These are called asteroids, the small airless rocky masses that also orbit the Sun. They are too small to be called planets. That's why sometimes asteroids are also referred to as planetoids or minor planets. But despite their relatively small size, asteroids can also be dangerous, posing as threats to our very own Earth. Imagine a large rock mass hitting the Earth with an increasing velocity. Actually, asteroids have hit the Earth in the past, but these were not big enough to pose a threat to Earth. Scientists, however, are still interested in studying them to learn about matter from space and also how to detect and be prepared in case a big enough asteroid hits Earth. So where do asteroids come from? Scientists believe that asteroids are the leftover debris from the formation of the solar system some 4.6 billion years ago. It is theorized that the formation of the giant planet Jupiter had prevented any other planetary body from forming in between its gap with Mars. This caused objects in space to collide with each other, and the resulting fragments are the asteroids that we see today. Asteroid sizes vary widely. For example, Ceres is 940 kilometers or 584 miles across, while asteroid 2015 TC25 is just 2 meters wide or 6.56 feet wide. Most asteroids have a very irregular shape, but there are some that are spherical like planets as well. Asteroids also have a cratered surface, which is the result of asteroids hitting each other in space. Like the planets of the solar system, asteroids also orbit around the Sun, as they are affected by its gravitational pull. Some scientists believe that it's also likely that the moons of other planets started out as asteroids before becoming permanently stuck in the orbits of their respective planets. The average temperature of an asteroid is a cold negative 73 degrees Celsius or negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Does the thought of asteroids hitting Earth scare you? Well, asteroids have been hitting Earth since its formation some 4.5 billion years ago. In our modern age, however, the asteroids that do hit Earth are very small and pose no immediate threat. But scientists think that if a big enough asteroid could hit Earth, it would cause global disaster, creating such a strong impact. The resulting debris may block out atmosphere and create a nuclear winter. Luckily, this type of asteroid is rare and estimated to only happen once in 1,000 centuries. Comets. So, we've just talked about asteroids, the large masses of rock that orbit our solar system. Now, let's look at comets. The most distinguishing feature of a comet is its tail. To compare, here's a comet with its tail, and here's an asteroid. So, what are comets anyway? A comet is an icy body in space that releases gas and dust. To illustrate this, think of a dirty snowball floating in space. Comets usually contain a mixture of dust, ice, carbon dioxide, ammonia, methane, and some other gases. Scientists think that comets may have been the leftovers from the gas, dust, and ice, that initially formed during the birth of the solar system around 4.6 billion years ago. More so, some researchers think that comets may have been responsible for bringing water and organic molecules to the Earth when it was newly formed. Comets can be found at the farther region of our solar system, far beyond the orbit of Pluto, which was formerly considered a planet. This region is known as the Oort cloud. So, we've already established that comets are the dirty snowballs of space. The mass of ice, dust, and particles are known as the comet's nucleus. Now let's talk about the comet's tail. As a comet gets closer to the sun, the ice on the surface of the comet turns into gas. This gas forms a cloud called the coma. The radiation from the sun pushes this cloud away, thus forming a visible comet's tail. This radiation also converts some of the gas cloud particles into ions, which also forms a less visible ion tail. Since the tails are the result of solar radiation from the sun, comets' tails always appear opposite the direction of the sun. Comets are very similar to asteroids in appearance, so sometimes comets are misidentified as asteroids. That is, until closer inspection, when the observance of a tail and gas cloud confirms that it is indeed a comet. In older times, comets were often seen by the ancient peoples of the world to be omens of bad luck or doom. But of course, comets are a naturally occurring phenomenon. Historians from way back in ancient times have been observing and keeping record of comets for a long time now, which provides today's researchers with invaluable data. In general, comets are named after the people who discovered them, or in some cases, after the spacecraft that discovered them. One of the most popular comets is of course Halley's Comet, a potato-shaped comet roughly 15 kilometers or 9.3 miles long. Halley's Comet is visible to the Earth once every 76 years. The comet is named after 1600s English astronomer Edmund Halley. The comet was actually discovered and observed earlier and can be seen in different ancient records, like the Bayeux Tapestry of 1066, or even the records of ancient Chinese astronomers from 240 BC. Venus, the second planet from the Sun, now coming in with a diameter of 12,104 kilometers or 7,521 miles and a mass of 4.87 times 10 to the 24th power kilograms or 1.073 times 10 to the 25th power pounds, coming in with 0 moons and an orbit period of 225 days. Its surface temperature is a sizzling 462 degrees Celsius or 863 degrees Fahrenheit, which makes it the hottest planet in the solar system. It's the planet that's almost the size of our Earth. That's why it is often referred to as Earth's sister planet. Welcome to Venus. Compared to the Moon, Venus is the second most visible natural object in the Earth's sky. It has a magnitude of -3.8 to -4.6. This means that on a bright, clear day, Venus is visible on Earth. Venus is of course named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty. This might be because the ancient Babylonians thought that the planet Venus was the bright queen of the sky. In the Greek and Roman cultures, Venus was initially thought of as two distinct stars, namely the morning star and the evening star. This is because there is a point in the orbit of Venus where it overtakes the Earth, which makes Venus switch from being visible at daytime to nighttime. Researchers suggest that Venus may have once had a climate that is very similar to Earth billions of years ago. But the strong greenhouse effect in the planet may have caused all of its waters to boil and evaporate. Venus also has a peculiar rotation as it rotates clockwise, a trait that it shares with another planet, Uranus. Speaking of peculiar, Venus has no tilt in its axis, which means it has no seasons. A day in Venus is equivalent to 243 Earth days, although a year in Venus is oddly enough roughly 224 days only. It has a weak magnetic field, but it has a very strong atmospheric pressure, about 92 times stronger than Earth's. We've been talking about giant space rocks and dirty space snowballs, literally objects that float beyond the sky. But what happens when these masses come crashing down from the sky? Today, let's talk about meteoroids, meteors, and meteorites. But first, let's take a look at some history. In the ancient times, many people thought that meteors were fireballs in the sky, a sign of impending doom, perhaps the wrath of gods. In some cultures, it was thought to signal something important or even grant wishes. Little was known about meteors up until the 19th century. Till the 18th and early 19th century, people believed that meteor showers were some sort of atmospheric or weather phenomenon. The word meteor even comes from the Greek word for atmospheric. It was around the 1800s when Professor Benjamin Silliman of Yale University first suggested that meteors may have an origin outside of our world. Astronomer Denison Olmsted studied the phenomenon extensively and concluded the same thing. So what are they exactly? First up are meteoroids. Meteoroids are small rock and/or metallic bodies in space. The biggest difference between meteoroids and asteroids are its size. Meteoroids are significantly smaller than asteroids. For comparison, the size of a meteoroid can be as small as a grain to as big as 1 meter or 3 feet wide. Any bigger than that, and that's already an asteroid, while anything that is smaller than a gram are considered as micrometeoroids, or space dust. Meteoroids are actually products of the fragments and debris produced by colliding comets and asteroids. Meteoroids can also come from the debris created by the collision of asteroids and comets to other bodies in orbit, such as moons. Now that we established what meteoroids are, let's talk about meteors. A meteor, on the other hand, is the term used to describe the hot glowing meteoroids, comets, or asteroids that enter the Earth's atmosphere at a fast speed. When the meteor comes in contact with the Earth's surface, it is then called a meteorite. Okay, let's summarize. Meteoroids are the fragments and space debris caused by the collision of asteroids, comets, and other bodies. When these space debris enters the Earth, they are known as meteors, and when they hit the surface, they are known as meteorites. Typically, meteors move in excess of 20 kilometers per second, or 12.42 miles per second, while entering the Earth's atmosphere. Meteors in the atmosphere go through aerodynamic heating. Highly pressurized air flowing through the meteor heats up the rocky masses to a high temperature. This phenomenon produces a glowing streak of light from the object, as well as the particles that fly off it. What people refer to as shooting stars and falling stars are actually meteors. They look like stars because they glow as they enter the Earth's atmosphere. Sometimes, shooting stars or meteors appear one after the other and originate from the same direction. This phenomenon is known as a meteor shower. Nebula. We've been talking about fragments and debris in space. Now, let's take a look at nebulas. The word nebula is taken from the Latin terms for cloud and fog. As you look at their appearance, it's easy to tell why. But nebulas are not clouds per se, as you would define clouds here on Earth. So what are they? Well, nebulas are an interstellar cloud consisting of gases and space dust. Nebulas can be considered as part of the ingredients and building blocks of stars. Scientists think that stars begin to form when a nebulous mass of dust, gas, and interstellar cosmic rays come together and collapse on its own weight. As the nebulous mass converge, it gives off ultraviolet radiation as it becomes hotter and eventually ignites and becomes lit. A star is born. Let's take a look at some types of nebulas. The emission nebula, as the name suggests, is a type of nebula that emits intense heat and energy. The heat comes from newly formed stars that emit large amounts of heat and radiation. This type of nebula usually glows with a reddish-pinkish color, which is caused by the presence of hydrogen gas. An example of this type of nebula is the Orion Nebula. Reflection nebulas, on the other hand, are not as hot, but still give off a distinct glow. This happens when a nebula happens to sit in an area where the stars are not as hot. But nonetheless, this type of nebula gets its glowing appearance because it reflects the light of a nearby star. To illustrate, you can check out how dust particles are visible when they are exposed to a light source. This type of nebula is not as far and has a bluish glow. The blue color appears because of the phenomenon of light scattering. An example of this type of nebula is the Witch Head Nebula. And lastly, let's take a look at the Planetary Nebula. It is named like this because astronomers from the 18th century thought that these circular nebulas looked like planets when they first discovered them. Planetary nebula are formed when a star runs out of fuel and finally blows off an outer layer of gas in the shape of a bubble, much like how explosions look like underwater. Planetary nebulas are unique and are estimated to be visible for around 50,000 years before the space dust is diffused and mixed back into the space of its surroundings. An example of this type of nebula is the Ring Nebula. The space race. A race to space? Who would have thought? But that's exactly what happened in the period of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both global superpowers with extremely opposite systems of government and ideology. The Cold War is characterized as a period of general geopolitical tension post-World War II between US and its Western allies against the Soviet Eastern Bloc. While there were no large-scale wars, both factions ascribed to one-up the other by industrializing, enriching their economy, developing nuclear weapons, and yes, finding out who could reach space first. The year was 1955, and the race was on. Both countries had just announced plans to launch satellites into orbit. On October 4, 1957, Russia successfully launched the Sputnik 1 into orbit, effectively taking the early lead in the space race. The US would follow up with their own Explorer 1 4 months after. In April 12 of 1961, Russia again took the lead by sending cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin as the first person in space aboard the Vostok 1. In the same year, the US started plans to send the first person to the moon. This was backed by then US President Kennedy. In July of 1969, the US launched the Apollo 11 spacecraft with a crew of 3 astronauts: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. The space race formally ended in 1975 when political tensions from each side simmered down, and both the US and Soviet space teams worked together on the Apollo-Soyuz project. While it may have started because of political tensions, the space race was instrumental in putting space and astronomy research front and center for the public. It also put governments together to work on putting interest and funding to scientific endeavors that affect all of humanity.